I'm gonna start with my least favorite circuit to judge me. Nikki, do you want to guess what my least favorite circuit is? The
already know the answer.
Bulgarians. If I had to choose one circuit not to judge me, it would definitely be the Bulgarians, especially Rumen. And I don't even have any qualms saying this because I've told this to Rumen. So the yaka had lemons in it. And then before Nikki's speech, I'm gonna like demonstrate. Let's say this is the yaka and then this is the lemon. He's like already quite tipsy at this point because he's been drinking his like yaka, and then he's like, guys, and now I'm going to eat the lemon.
All right. The woman, the myth, the legend. Naomi, welcome to the podcast. It's
Thank
very, very
you.
good to have you on. Finally, because you were technically the first person I asked and reached out to do an episode with me. And now, 10 episodes later, we finally were able to find a suitable time and have some conversations. So, as always, at the start of these things, I ask the simple question: how do you feel?
Good. Slightly nervous.
What are you nervous about? This is a safe space.
Hmm. I don't know. I don't want to say anything too controversial.
It's okay. It's okay. I don't think you have that controversial takes, to be honest. But you
Yeah,
might
fair.
surprise me. You might surprise everyone,
We'll see.
which is gonna be fun. Um, Well, I had an interesting question. So before we get into debate stuff, maybe we can
Mhm.
learn a little bit more about you before that. It's always interesting to ask this question because usually debaters and very successful debaters are very competitive people in general. Uh, I know you did a little bit of tennis when you were young
Mhm.
because of your dad. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more the story behind that.
Sure. So my dad used to play tennis professionally, and he played tennis at university. So I was kind of raised in more of like a sports than an academically leaning family. So like from the time I was literally a toddler, I was already introduced to tennis, and then I started playing quite competitively when I was maybe around like 8 or 9, and then I played competitively until I started high school.
So are you still playing? When did you decide to stop? Was it your thing, or was it something that was more of like, I'm doing this because my dad did it as well?
So like I think I kind of had a complicated relationship with it. Like I definitely like certain aspects of it in terms of like the routine of it. I found it quite like an intellectually fulfilling game, and I did like the competitive component of it. But there are also parts of it that I disliked as well. As in I did feel quite a lot of pressure, especially because my dad primarily coached me, and I also never really liked like the fitness aspect training of it. And I was also always quite small. Like I never really had like the proper. I mean, I know that there's some small tennis players, but never really had like the proper like athlete stature. And given that I didn't really want to do fitness training, I just kind of decided that it wasn't really my thing anymore. So I would say like to answer your question more directly, like more the latter of like I didn't mind it, but it wasn't really like my true passion. I was always more nerdy, I would say. Although I did also play other sports as well. I also played soccer, as the Yanks call it, and football, as the Americans call it. I played competitively for a few years as well. I also skied quite a lot. I also rock climbed, so I was quite a sporty child.
I see you are already being very PC, using both terms for both audiences. It is
Yes.
called football. It
There's
is
nothing
called
that's going to get
football,
you canceled with the Europeans as much as calling football soccer.
for sure, for sure. Is there something about tennis and generally your sports background that you translated into debating?
Hmm. That's interesting. I would say that there hasn't really been the same thing that I like applied, but more it's highlight like I think that there's commonalities, and it's highlighted like things that I'm strong at in kind of both dimensions and things that I'm weak at kind of in both dimensions. So whenever I played tennis and like the other sports that I did growing up, I wouldn't say that like mental game was my strongest thing. Like I kind of caved under the pressure a little bit. I always felt extremely nervous, and that's kind of been a consistent problem that's like replicated through debating. Whereas some other things that I was maybe like stronger at in terms of like creativity or even just like diligence and practicing, I would say has more consistently carried through. So I feel like they both kind of like the same thing that I was more stronger at and weaker at as kind of carried over, rather than like lessons I've kind of like fixed or resolved.
So let's talk about the mental game.
Oh.
How do you approach this whole thing? Was this something that you have particularly worked on, or is it something that was kind of um, not something you could really grasp in terms of how do you particularly get better at it, but maybe just negating the symptoms a bit, if that makes sense?
Mhm. I mean, I would say it's something I've tried to work on, but not really something that I've like fully mastered so far. So obviously I recognize there's something that I've struggled with since I started. And like it's not only something, at least for me as a person, that's inherent to like debating. Like I've always been a fairly high strung person. I've always put a lot of like pressure on myself. I've always struggled with nerves in a variety of spheres. So I obviously have kind of tried to reach out to people and ask for strategies. And like I've heard like the general tips of like, oh, you just need to treat every round like it's like the first round of the tournament and not think about past rounds. Like it's good to have a pre-round routine and stuff. So I've definitely tried things, but I think it's quite different to like apply things in theory and then actually be able to like mentally resolve them as well. Um, I don't know. I would say that the one thing that I've kind of realized lately, because I do think that my mental game has been better, at least since this WDC at competitions, is I kind of realized that like winning at debate doesn't really make me a happier person. And if winning doesn't make me a happier person, then there's no reason that losing at debate should make me like a more distressed person or a sadder person. So even though I've kind of realized that debate is more like removed from my emotions, I think it does add a higher degree of like perspective. So at least for me, I think caring less is like healthier because it provides a more balanced perspective. Yet I still like enjoy the activity enough that I'm still like motivated to try and improve.
What is one thing that you can say kind of worked for you to maybe to a certain degree? What is something that definitely did not work in terms of maybe advices that you got to get over the mental part of the game, or particular things that you did to make it better?
That's a good question. Um, I would say the thing that didn't work for me is everyone who just said like treat every round like it's a spar or like forget about all the other rounds like before this round because like I was just like I can't like if you've just taken like two fourths or you're in like a bubble and you need to win the bubble to break like you can't really forget about the past rounds because like the stress is still lingering. So I just found that to be kind of like impossible. I would say the advice I found more helpful is more of like the perspective type things. So just like remember that like there's other things that you have other hobbies than debating. There's like debate doesn't define you because that like lowers some of the pressure and some of the nerves.
I see. So this is interesting, because obviously a lot of debaters go through this.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, even if they're never that competitive or don't do it for that long, they still have general problems in terms of getting in front of an audience or just the
Mm-hmm.
jitters in a competitive environment. Maybe they go to an out or something. But then there's you, and you have so many debates behind you, have so much experience, but also so many successes. Like you've definitely won more competitions than me and Roman combined, although that varies
that's
because.
that's not a high bar, my friend.
But I don't know. Why do you think? Um, why do you think that's with people? Is it in general? Would you say is it because people put too much pressure on themselves, or is it maybe from your perspective at certain point it became more of people putting too much pressure on you?
I think it's 100% both of the two. I would say for me, it's maybe more of like the internal pressure than the external pressure, but I feel like the external pressure definitely plays a component as well. Like especially when I was a novice and I was like just starting, like you like I mean, I think everyone is subjected to these things, but like of course the classic comments of like, oh, she's like overrated, like oh, she's not that good, kind of get back to you. So I always kind of felt pressure to prove that like I wasn't an imposter and that my successes weren't fraudulent and that I could kind of like stay at the top and someone who's relatively dominant. Although I would say like as a person, I less like caring about what everyone else thinks and more, I think it was slightly larger, the internal pressure component of like I definitely internalized a lot of the pressure and felt the need to kind of prove to myself like I can do this, like I'm a smart person. And I think that like the whole hedonistic treadmill thing that we use in debate arguments, at least personally, is definitely true. Of I didn't only feel pressure to like not regress, but I also felt like I shouldn't plateau, and I felt pressure to keep improving as well, and to kind of prove to myself that I'm able to do it.
So how did that pressure evolve from you starting out at the
Mm.
activity and then having some successes?
Um, I think it evolved kind of like negatively because when I was a novice and I was doing well, like if I like broke at a university tournament, that was like a really like great accomplishment for me. And also, I was kind of like a new person on the league. So in my first year of university before the pandemic, I didn't really debate that much. And then during the pandemic, I was really bored. So I was kind of speaking every single weekend and I was kind of like the new kid on the block. So no one really had any pressure expectations from me. And it was just like, oh, like who's this like new novice kind of thing. So it kind of felt like the small successes were a bigger deal to me. And if there were a couple weekends I didn't break at a tournament or like I wasn't in the top 10 speakers, it was like fine. But then others started reaching more successes. Like at my first WDC, I made the semifinals and like I did well at a couple, and I made the finals of a couple competitions. I feel like then the pressure started kind of escalating, where like breaking at a tournament was no longer enough. I kind of like expected myself to like make the finals in the top 10 speakers of every single tournament. So like the pressure definitely kind of got worse as I started doing better.
So let's start with this. Tell me a little bit more about how you got into debating and this whole world school spirit that you have
Sure.
before PP.
Sure. So I started debating when I was in high school. I did not know that debating existed before that. So actually, what happened is that my friend Julia, who was like the first friend I made in high school, she just like dragged me to a debate practice. And at first, I was like, I don't know. I was kind of hesitant of it. I wasn't really into it. But like when I was in grade 9, like the general club environment of my school was quite supportive. Like I like the other people who are in the club. And then I kind of started showing up to practices more often. So I wouldn't really say that in my first couple years of high school I debated like that intensely, especially because when I started debating, which is also something that's kind of interesting, I had a really bad stutter. So I had a really bad speech impediment when I was younger growing up. Like I could barely like talk, and then it kind of disappeared, but then it came back in high stress environments when I was debating. So I felt really insecure about that as well, which meant that I didn't really practice that much at first. But then as the first year of high school kind of advanced, even though I wasn't really going to tournaments, I started like enjoying the activity more. And then the next year, I applied to make Team Canada, and like I was kind of just doing it for the practice. I didn't really think I would get on the team, but I was able to get on the team for 2 years. So that kind of provided me an avenue to have more access to like world school speeding, which was good because especially I moved high schools in the middle of high school because the program I was out of my previous high school finished, and I wasn't really able to participate. Like my second high school didn't have the debate program, so I wasn't able to participate in tournaments through that high school. So world schools kind of provided me an opportunity to keep debating, even though it was in my like less preferred style.
So looking back from your perspective now,
Mm.
um, what would you say is the main allure that you have for debating? What kept you in the game?
For me, definitely like the critical thinking component. Like I've never liked the public speaking component. I would still see that style as one of the things that I'm weaker at as a speaker, and I get stage fright. And like I don't like attention either, so I really hate the public speaking bit of it. But I absolutely love the intellectual creativity aspect of it. Like my favorite thing is like getting to think of a really creative extension or like getting emotion and having a lot of arguments. So I definitely like coming up with matter and just the ability to think of different arguments and kind of piece them together and develop those ideas. So I just like the thinking component of it.
What would you say were your some of your highlights connected to maybe thinking of a original case or just a case that you really liked or maybe something that you heard?
Hmm. I don't know. This is a difficult one. There's nothing that I read that's really like sticking out to me. I would say something that I remember is like the first time that I remember coming up with like a strategic extension. And I was like so happy about it because I always, especially because I came from a world schools background, like backup was always slightly more difficult to me. I remember, I think it was Doxbridge 3, and like I hadn't broken at Doxbridge 1 or Doxbridge 2. And I was debating with like my friend. I was just hyped about it. And we were in quarterfinals, and we had a really stacked room. Like OG was Zagreb, like Tin and Lavro. OO was I think Kat and Mary, and then CO was I think Reese and Chris, and we were CG. And the motion was um something along the lines of feminists in developing countries should advocate for the abolition of Sharia law rather than working to reform Sharia law. And I remember that a lot of the top half clash was about like the likelihood of getting change within the Sharia court system. And I remember like I started my speech with framing about why you're not going to get change under either side, and then just made the debate about how do you strengthen like local feminist movements and why you're more likely to get Western support and you're more likely to appeal to important demographics like domestically. I remember that we went through this round. I feel like it was, and like I think Hadar was chairing, and it was a bit of my like eureka moment of like this is how you strategically extend. So I enjoyed that.
That's a good example. Um, so some would say you outframed. You did a very Israeli slash maybe
I
Bulgarian
mean, I
thing.
wouldn't really say that framing in general is like my strong suit, but like the first time I got it, and like the rare cases where like I'm able to frame successfully, I'm just like, yeah, like it feels like strategic mastermind vibes.
So how often do you rely on framing as opposed to what some people might accuse you of spamming arguments?
Um, Definitely less often, but I would say I'm trying to incorporate it into my arsenal as a speaker more. Like I do prefer like the matter dumping style of debating, but I disagree with the negative connotation that matter dumping gets. Like I think that matter dumping is a problem if the arguments are referencing the current doom thread, are like assertive claims. But if you run a lot of arguments and all of those arguments are well explained claims, like I feel like that's a perfectly valid strategy to utilize in debating. And given that I would say my strength as a speaker is the ability to think of many arguments. If I'm able to develop them properly, like, yeah, I'm happy to own the fact that I'm more of a matter dumpy than more of a strategic speaker. And like, I do think that strategic matter dumping is a thing as well. I would say though that I'm trying to rely on framing more in back half, especially in the current meta. I think that the judging tends to be quite back half punitive, and just running a new mechanism or a new impact maybe get you a second at best, but it's definitely not enough to win contentious rooms and is a higher risk strategy. So it's definitely important to use framing in order to make top half seem less important.
Yeah, I would generally agree with that statement. And I guess before we go into that specific direction, because I have some follow-up questions,
Mm-hmm.
I would I would like to know, because I haven't particularly experienced this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how did you go about the process from transitioning from world schools to BP, and in particular, when you entered BP, were you already kind of the speaker that we see now? Obviously, like you grew as a speaker, but
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what you are generally good at, you were
Mm-hmm.
already like doing that, and you kind of doubled down on this, or
Mm-hmm.
did you maybe through the process realize that you need to kind of start doing the things that you do right now in terms of the matter developing and generally like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of content explaining all of the things?
So I would say for me, the transition was actually quite smooth. So during high school, while I did more world schools in BP, Canada does have a BP circuit in high school as well. So while I couldn't go to like the most prestigious BP tournament because my school didn't have a debate program, I was able to go to a couple local competitions. I was already familiar with like how the style of BP worked in speaker roles and stuff. And then also when I did world schools, something that's interesting is that I was a third in world schools, which is more similar to a whip or a responsive speaker. But even though I did primarily rebuttal speeches in world schools, I always still felt that my strength and like my team dynamic was more content generation. So I still think I was kind of better inherently at constructive than I was at rebuttal and strategy. So I was still kind of used to thinking of many ideas. So to answer your question, I feel like when I started doing BP in university, my strengths right now of the ability to matter dump were kind of similar. Like I don't think I really like dramatically shifted the way I debate. I just kind of doubled down on it. And then I was also my strategy is like far from perfect or even strong right now, but I was even like less strategic. So when I started doing BP, I would just like run like as many arguments as I could think of, which posed problems, especially on back half.
Yeah, I think this opens up a very interesting question, which is obviously like we're kind of right now just feeding into the persona of what people know about you in terms of your general speaking style. But what
Mm-hmm.
would you say is your most or some of your most underrated skills as a debater, something that maybe people
Mhm.
are not necessarily seeing, but are things that you're very good at and are using to your advantage.
This is interesting. I would say that one thing is that I think I'm a pretty like well-read person and I'm relatively well informed. Like I wouldn't say I'm an expert in any like single topic area, but since like I would say for 4 or 5 years, like I track the news pretty carefully. I'm just like a massive nerd. So I would say that I have a pretty like robust knowledge base across a variety of different content areas and no like major knowledge gaps except maybe like some niche sports and pop culture things. So I think that like my spec is probably one of my assets. And I wouldn't say that I'm the best at thinking of like examples and illustrations from my knowledge base during rounds, but I would say that my knowledge base allows me to consider like a variety of contexts and like and innovate argumentatively slightly more. I would say that one of my other probably underrated strengths is like clarity and how I structure arguments because I think that matter dumpers kind of get a lot of flack for being a little bit unclear. And the kind of way that we think about it is, oh, like you talk so fast, you just get away with assertions, especially if you have rep and people can't track you. I think there's a difference from just like spamming arguments, but also spamming arguments in ways that are like clear and easy to understand. And I think that one of my strengths is how I build arguments internally. They're quite like robust. Like usually the different features I need in arguments in terms of having mechanization, having impacting, having weighing are things that are relatively present within arguments in ways that are internally coherent and easy to follow. So I would say like internal argumentative structure. And then I would say that finally, I'm pretty good at weighing. Like I think that it's less of a skill that's appreciated in first speakers because usually it's like only like the whip ways or like the like second speaker ways, like deputy speakers. But I do think I'm quite good at coming up with weighing metrics, and usually I can think of like creative ways to try and marginalize top half, especially on back half, and do that for member as well.
Yeah, I think generally my comment to this would be, and we've already touched upon this with on the Matt Katie podcast, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously,
Mm-hmm.
like we can talk later a little bit about this general strategy, but I would say that there are levels to what you are trying to do in particular speeches and in matter dumping and having a lot of
Mm-hmm.
content, and it's not so easy. Like if this was like some absolutely easy way to win debates and everybody was doing it, then everybody would be winning all of these rounds, but they're not. So it is. It is a strategy in itself, and it's a strategy that you can get exponentially better at if you
Mm-hmm.
keep at it. And it helps out that like you have a good content background and you are well versed into a variety of topics. Um, so two questions here. The first is maybe a little bit more for our less experienced listeners, but how do you generally go about, especially if you're preparing for a major, but just a general debate competition that you want to do well at? How do you go about reading the news, understanding what's current affairs, and
Mm-hmm.
building that knowledge base that you use to run arguments?
Mm-hmm. So I would say for me, like I would say I don't really read to like prepare for a specific tournament, but I've more tried to like routinize it within my daily life. It was something I would say I'm less good at now, but I was more good at like 3 years ago. Of every single day, I try and like make an effort to like learn something new or read something. And especially when I first started debating, I was like super, super dumb. Like I literally knew absolutely nothing about the world. Like I was raised in a relatively sheltered environment. I didn't know who Donald Trump was. I didn't know what like interest rates were. So I was really starting from a point of like zero information and ground zero, especially because while now I'm more of a politics and econ nerd, when I was growing up, like my academic thing was like math. So I literally knew nothing about the world. So in order to do that, if I just opened The Economist and I tried to read an article, I would be like, what on earth is going on? I would be so confused because I think that knowledge is quite cumulative, and to understand like higher level like readings, you need to have knowledge foundations. So what I would do when I was first starting off knowledge wise is I would just like read very basic. I would just like Google very basic concepts and make sure I understood them. So reading like Investopedia articles of like what are interest rates, what is a bond, what is a bond yield, like all of these very like foundational things. Um, like even things like what is sovereignty, like these are very foreign concepts to me. And then once I kind of understood these concepts better, which I got through Googling and watching YouTube, but then it became easier for me to kind of branch in to like other things. So things that I then started doing was I subscribed to like the debate nerdy kind of publications. So I read The Economist, Foreign Affairs, Council Foreign Relations, Financial Times, Bloomberg, all of these things quite regularly. And what I do now, especially now that I'm like busier university student working, I really like listening to podcasts. So on Spotify, I have my like 6 or 7 podcasts, and even just while I'm like going into uni or before bed, I'll listen to a podcast for a bit. And I also subscribe to like daily newsletters. So I get the Foreign Affairs like daily brief. I also subscribe to Matt Levine Money Stuff, which is a finance podcast. Even this is a bit more. It's not a podcast. It's like a finance briefing, which I don't read this one as much as I should, but I do think it's quite informative. Like in general, I find that trying to spam read like before a tournament is quite ineffective because like in order to make I think complex international relations and politics arguments, often it's not just enough to know like a fact, but it's often like deeper context about how things work that are relatively informative, which relate to current events but are not like entirely current events. So I would say like it's actually quite a bad strategy to just try and spam read before tournaments. I mean, it's probably like better than nothing if you're entirely uninformed. But like trying to build up a more consistent knowledge base over time is more advantageous, especially because people often like mispredict what the motions are going to be before a tournament. I guess like the one thing I do is I'll try and skim the news before a tournament to kind of predict potential current affairs motions that can be set. So if I'm preparing for like Odessa next weekend, I'll be like, there's some things that are going on in Pakistan. Like maybe there could be a motion about the U.S. debt ceiling. There could be a motion about Ukraine, and then I'll perhaps like review some articles about that. But in general, I'm against like spam reading the week before strategy.
That's a lot. Sounds like a lot of work, but
Oh, I'm
I
like
guess it
lazy. Like I
works.
feel like I sound like I'm way too on top of things, and like my answer, like a lot of this is like do as I say, not as I do things. This is what I would like aspirationally like to do, and things that I was good at 3 years ago. But yeah, I'm often lazy, and I don't usually read the emails that are sent to me.
Fair enough. Um, so the other question that I wanted to ask was, what's your greatest weakness?
Ooh. There's like a lot. Do I need to just choose one?
You can give me like a top three.
Um, Okay, I'd say number one, which is not surprising given our previous conversation, is probably mental game because I psych myself out a lot. I often don't sleep properly before tournaments, blah, blah, blah. And then number two would be, I mean, I feel like strategy is kind of like a broader thing, but specifically like framing. Often I'll be in a situation where I'll have like 5 extension ideas and I'll like run like three instead of just running the best one, or I'll like choose like the wrong one and not frame it properly. So just like the broader thing of strategy. And then I would say thirdly, characterization. Like I think I'm getting a bit better at this, but sometimes I don't use it fully to my advantage, especially in narrative motions and in softer motions, which can create more kind of avenues for back half to be able to extend by adding like new characterization, or just makes the argumentation weaker than it would otherwise need to be. Oh yeah, and then I'm gonna add a fourth one, which is style. Like I've been told that I'm quite a monotone speaker who's boring to listen to, which I think is kind of a fair roast. Like I don't really understand how to do tonal variation, which is something that I always got flack for as a schoolie, especially when there's an explicit style category, but I've never really been able to fix it. So I feel like trying to vary my tone more, be more engaging. I don't think I'm funny. I'm sometimes a bit choppy. That stuff.
So this is something that I just thought about. I feel like we've been having a lot this conversation about mental strength and mental game
Mm-hmm.
with so many different people, um, but it always sounds a little bit like gibberish, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask you from your perspective, how would you explain how mental game might affect your general performance at a tournament? And like at a particular round, maybe you can give us an example, because I think this is very helpful for people to understand what we really
Mm-hmm.
mean by saying these things.
Sure. Um, so I'll kind of discuss it in terms of like tournament routine and then before rounds. So in terms of tournament routine, something that happens to me a lot at debate tournaments, and this isn't just a debate tournament problem, it's also just a me problem generally, is that I don't sleep like at all. And I know people say like I don't sleep. It's like, oh, I got 5 hours of sleep. Like at Madrid WEDC, I was sleeping. I think the tournament was like a week, an average of under 2 hours every single night, despite being on sleeping pills. So when I'm just anxious and nervous, I can't sleep. And obviously, you need sleep in order to be able to like function in your prime mental state. So while this is partially nerve related, it's partially just like I'm bad at sleeping in general, especially in new environments related. But that to me takes a massive toll. And I also sometimes don't eat properly at tournaments as well when I get nervous, which is also like bad because you need to be well energized. So just like in terms of like being more anxious and just being in a new environment, I don't think I take care of myself as well as I should, even though I try to, and that can definitely impact my performance in rounds as well. I would say that that's probably the less significant factor, given that my body's kind of adjusted to it by now, especially when I was like debating extremely sleep deprived every single weekend during COVID because I was being a crazy North American during tournaments in the European time zone. But I would say like the larger thing for me is what happens before rounds. So how this manifests is I think if I have a bad round, or like even if I win, but I think that my speech was bad, or I get like bad feedback from a judge, I externalize a singular bad performance to how I am broadly as a speaker, even though the obvious rational way that we would think about this is like just because you have one bad round, it doesn't make you a bad speaker. So if I have like a bad speech and then I get like a third or something, I'll catastrophize it and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible speaker, I'm a fraud, all my accomplishments are a lie, I'm going to fail in future rounds at the tournament. And because I'm in a negative mindset, I debate worse because I'm less confident. I think that my degree of confidence influences my speech quality quite a lot, both in terms of presentation and how confident I sound stylistically, but also on how well I'm selling material as well, which is why I think in tournaments where I'm doing well, it kind of like cycles upwards because my confidence improves. And in tournaments I'm doing poorly, it kind of cycles down. So I feel like having bad rounds and having those bad rounds accumulate is kind of one manifestation of that. I would say another one is just getting like super nervous. Like if I'm in like an important out round and like the stakes are high, um, I'll just like panic more. And in addition to getting more nervous and having that impact performance, I also think that when I get nervous, I don't listen as well to other speakers. And while I didn't include this as a weakness, I feel like listening well is a very underrated skill, especially as a member speaker where you don't want to be derivative. So I'll start like overthinking about like past debates, or I'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to fail. Like I won't be able to get through, which actually distracts me from being able to listen properly to other speakers. I would say something, this is like an under discussed part of mental game, I think, but I'm quite open about the fact that I have very severe ADHD. And this is probably contributes to it, but I also think it's a mental game thing as well. I kind of want things to go like perfectly in debates and in preps. And if they don't, then I freak out about it. So I'm very strict of I need to prep in a super quiet environment. I can't like miss the motion and stuff like that. So I think an example of where this went wrong is in Madrid WDC quarters, where we very sadly lost on a 3-2 split. And I think I was very bad. Something that happened is that I'd gone to the bathroom after octos and I had missed the motion release. So we had to walk to the room like 3 minutes late. And instead of just like prepping a PM on a motion I'd done like many times before, I was like, oh my gosh, like I missed the motion release. Like this is so bad. I'm going to be at a disadvantage now. What if I don't have enough time to write like the PM? So I'm bad at just like staying in the moment. And I consider external distractions way too large of an extent.
So let's talk about the your last two WDCs.
Oh gosh. Okay. Yeah, I knew this was coming.
Yeah. So I guess like the short timeline is your first Worlds was Korea 2021. You did
hmm
amazing. You
hmm
went to the semifinals,
hmm
um, faced some very tough teams, did
hmm
very well. Um, so let's talk about that period between the first Worlds and the second Worlds. What were the aspirations, and when inevitably you didn't
hmm
make it past that quarters in 2022,
hmm
which I was
Yeah,
partly to blame. What was that experience? Tell us a little bit more about how
mhm.
that make you feel.
Sure. So after Belgrade, the one that you dropped me in, I was like pretty crushed because like after I already got to semis at Korea, which was arguably a stronger world, and it was also my first world. Obviously, I wanted to like either make the finals or win the competition. Um, so that was my goal. Like I'm not going to pretend that I was like, oh, I'll just be happy if I make semis again. Like no, like I wanted to win Belgrade. Um, I was already kind of disappointed with like our break position. Like we broke eighth again, and I obviously wanted to improve since Korea Worlds as well. So I already wasn't feeling fantastic. Like I don't want to make excuses for myself, but also like it was so cursed. It was the most chaotic morning ever. Like I was debating Belgrade from Marta's place, which was like lovely. Like I love Marta. It was great vibes. But then like the Wi-Fi crashed, so we had to run to debate in another location before quarters had started. So I was debating from like a tiny room on a bed with like no table where Marta and Yossi were debating like across, and there was also like audio distraction, and it was just like a nightmare. So I feel like already I had like a bad mindset going into quarters, and in that round we were like horrible. Like I know that a large bits of the panel had us going through, but I thought it was one of like my worst speeches ever, like below 75. I think that the two teams who advanced was absolutely fair, but like I think I struggled to deal with it because like I think I let the external distractions get to me too much, and then I also just think that my speech was like atrocious. Like I do think it's quite a difficult CO in the motion, but like we could have definitely done better. There were parts of the speech that we should have emphasized more. So I think I just like blamed myself a lot for dropping that one in particular, given how utterly atrocious we were in that particular quarters. And then I struggled to deal with Belgrade a lot because I really like the semis and the finals motion. Like my I study at university. I'm a politics major and I'm a religion minor. So I would have really liked to get to do the religion semifinals that year, and then during like when like the finals motion about like the dominance of the dollar or whatever was like revealed, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I've missed my like golden opportunity to win WDC. So that kind of was just like salt in the wound as well. So yeah, I took Belgrade quite hard. I guess it did help that I was second speaker that Worlds. We'll talk about Madrid Worlds in a second, where that didn't go as well either. But yeah, I was like pretty crushed. Like it was just like bad. And then I was like, it's fine because Madrid Worlds is only going to be a few months later, and I was like, that can be my like redemption tour. So then Madrid Worlds came around, and that was an even larger nightmare. We broke even lower. I did badly on the speaker tab. We were also really bad in quarters. And like I think that Madrid Worlds was harder as well for me to deal with because Belgrade, even though I was told that like quite a lot of the panel had us advancing, like I thought that we had definitely dropped. Like my speech was terrible. Whereas Madrid Worlds was really hard because we lost on a 3-2 split. And even though I thought I was like bad again, that's like slightly harder to deal with. Um, and like just like the night after dropping Belgrade, after dropping like Madrid was really hard. Like I definitely wasn't my best self. I was very annoyed. I was just like yelling at people in a room. I kind of vented it out. But I think like after I kind of had like a eureka moment where I feel like this is when like my mental game improved and why it's been better since like Madrid, as I just kind of realized that like I've now flamed out of quarters twice. And like everyone was also making jokes because we made semis and then we made quarters and everyone was like already joking around that we were gonna like fail again and drop in octos. And like after being like really mad like the first night, I just kind of realized like debate's kind of arbitrary. If we could have gone a different panel, this 3-2 split could have gone in our way. Bad rounds happen in quarters. Like we were not in the best, like OG is probably not the best position in that motion. And I was just like, my life didn't really change that much. Small things could have influenced the outcome. What's kind of the point of dwelling on it? So I actually like got over my Madrid loss and poor performance on the speaker tab a lot sooner than I expected to. So I think like in the jump from like failing, well, I mean, I guess I'm saying like failing might be a bit of an overly punitive term. I don't want to sound like privileged in saying it because I know that quarters is still like for a lot of people a good result, but obviously I had high expectations for myself. I would say that I kind of dealt with it better the second time of the failure than the first time of the failure.
So, in the build up to these particular world tournaments,
Mm,
um, how big of a factor to you personally and in general is prepping with your debate partner? How do you approach that part of the game?
mm,
Because it is at the end of the day, it is a team game. So
mm,
this element, how do you improve it or deal with it?
mm.
Tell us more.
So I think it's super important. I would say for me in particular as a speaker, it's something that's quite important. Like I do like debating with a lot of people, but I would say I have some like particularities of like I cannot do the thing of just like banter and prep for 15 minutes. I need quiet time and prep. I need the ability to write. I can't do too much bench talk because I have auditory processing issues, so I just get distracted very easily. So for me, like refining kind of how I debate with a partner is extremely important. And I also think it was something that I underinvested in the lead up to both of my worlds. And I do think I thought of debate too much as an individual activity and tried to kind of refine my individual speakers rather than working with my partners enough. So it's kind of a regret that I have. But like in terms of how to do it effectively, I guess just maintaining relatively like open lines of communication. So like if things aren't working for you, being willing to kind of discuss those things with your partner in a relatively like constructive way, and also in kind of recognizing like your respective strengths and weaknesses and like what your comparative advantage of speakers are, because like very rarely are they exactly the same. Like if you have one partner who's like better at illustrations, having them think of more illustrations and prep while you write your arguments can be quite effective.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And to be honest, like I'm happy for you that you are acknowledging that this is also part of the game, maybe something that you could do better,
Mhm,
because some speakers uh, don't ever think about these particular things, and
mhm,
either continue blaming themselves, or even in certain worse situations they overblame their partners,
mhm.
which, to be fair, I think blame should be always 50-50. If it's a
Yeah.
partnership, it is what it is. So the hypothetical question I want to ask is, in these situations, um, if you were to do a major again,
Mhm,
like worlds or maybe a regional major,
mhm.
how would you approach differently this part of the prep?
Like the teamwork component of it.
Yes.
Um, I feel like firstly, right off the bat, I'd be slightly more transparent about my like quirky needs as a speaker. So like specific things in prep that I need of trying to figure out like I need quiet time to write. What are the best times in prep to position that quiet time? I struggle to do bench talk. Given that, how should I communicate to you most effectively what extensions I'm going to run? And if you want to change the extensions, how could you communicate that to me? So I would just say like earlier on in the prep process, I would kind of be more transparent about some of my weaknesses as a particular speaker. And I would say that I would kind of do more drills and practices like as a team instead of just doing it um individually. So maybe instead of like giving like I mean, I've never really been a person to give a PM speech every day, even though it would probably suit me well. I don't drills as much as I should. But like instead of just like kind of doing more individual things in the limited time that I do those things, maybe doing more like verbal prep, like 15-minute preps with like my partner instead. Or doing spars in like challenging situations, like no prep spars. I know that some other good teams have done, to kind of just building in more prep to be specifically refining the team dynamic rather than on refining individual skills.
I do wonder, I have to say, having debated with you,
Mm,
um, I think you're certainly at a point where it's very easy for you to come up with arguments, and it's very
mm,
easy to come up with analysis to the arguments. I think like
mm,
you're probably one of the best at that. Just like you have I would say like a huge mind library of arguments that you can easily pull out at a given time. So um, when you're approaching this conversation, do you think that maybe uh, you can be better at maybe spending more time in the prep time to talk with your partner as compared to doing the analysis? And I ask this because this is something that I've been through with Rumen, where he at a particular point became very good at coming up quickly with the
mm.
arguments. So it allowed us in prep time to be more talkative and to have a bigger, more lengthier conversation on
Right.
what we should actually run. So, do you think that this is something that would be useful for you going into the future?
So I think that the answer is yes, but to an extent. So one of the reasons why I like a lot of time to write things is that I kind of flagged that I think that one of my strengths as a speaker is how internally I build arguments. Like it's one thing to come up with a correct argument and know the general analysis, but how you package those ideas together, how tight it is, how well explained and illustrated it is kind of a different matter. So while the fundamental argument and underlying analysis would be the same if I was more communicative or I was less communicative, the level of tightness and analytical rigor, at least for me as a speaker with my ADHD, does differ depending on my degree of communication time. That being said, I do think that I definitely need to adapt to be a more communicative speaker, especially when I have partners who specialize more in strategy than me in order to get their insights and also to devil's advocate more about potential problems within arguments. One thing that I'm trying to work on in order to improve this is to write less. I would say that I'm a little bit too dependent on my note as a speaker. And I think that this is partially a confidence thing and a distaste for public speaking thing of I worry that I'm just going to like freeze up. But I want to try, and I should probably practice in like no notes bars or give PM with no notes, being slightly less dependent on my notes, which I think would be a useful way to free up more time in prep, and then also to just like be able to debate with the same analytical rigor without thinking through the analytical rigor and work my presentation a bit, which will also free up more time. So I do think like there would be some trade-offs if I spend more time being communicative, but I definitely do think I should work toward that as well.
Yeah, and I think this is another good example of the mental aspect of it, where like
Mhm.
I'm sure that you could do as well of a speech with less notes, but mentally maybe sometimes you worry that if you don't do the notes perfectly, you would be giving a worse speech. So it's kind of
Yes.
like balancing these two things out. It's an individual journey, so I definitely understand this. Enough with the bull crap. Okay, we spent 45 minutes now talking about self improvement in debating,
Mhm.
how we can get better, how we can deal with the problems of the game.
Mhm.
But usually there is another side to this coin, which is the whole debating meta. So,
Mhm.
what would you say are some of the worst judging trends that you have experienced throughout your career and maybe specifically right now?
Oh my gosh, yay. Okay. This one's spicy. I feel like I've like listened like to some of the past podcasts and I feel like I might be like repetitive here, but I want to emphasize the points that we change these judging trends. Okay, my least favorite judging trend is mandating bench weighing to beat your top half when your arguments are clearly better. How I perceive the value of bench weighing is that if you have two contributions and those contributions are of ambiguous or equal importance, in this particular case, bench weighing is necessary in order to explain why your contributions are better. If top half says an argument title but doesn't explain it and you explain the argument, the judge should be able to recognize your added explanation without you literally babying them through it and being like, and they didn't explain the argument, and here's why we explain the argument. Obviously, it can be better to appealing to a broader variety of panels to also do the meta of walking through what you're adding as well. I just don't think it should be a necessary thing to beat your top half. And I feel like for way too many judges these days, unless you literally say, and here is the bench weighing, will automatically drop you to your top half, even if the ideas that you are adding are clearly better. Um, so I would say that that is the major thing in judging that really annoys me. I would say the second trend that's really annoying me, and this isn't really like a fluke of how people evaluate arguments, but just something I think are people doing bad, is I think a lot of judges just got lazy, like especially people who were maybe like had good CVs like earlier. Like I feel like a lot of judges like aren't tracking properly, are doing like intuition based judging of like who just like sounded the best within a particular round instead of being like rigorous. So I honestly feel like effort is like kind of a missing variable in certain cases, especially given that a lot of debating is still online. Like people should have like certain ethical codes, right? You should not be looking at Facebook chats or participating on them during round or multitasking on other browsers. I feel like people should just like try harder and judge every round as if they were being observed by the judge that they respect the most, as if they were judging a Worlds or Euros final, and give every room the respect that it deserves. So say that that's the second thing that really annoys me. And then, okay, I'm gonna weigh in on the Doom thread briefly, but I feel like the third thing that really annoys me, and this is kind of like refuting like kind of Ruman's broad point of like, I agree that a baseline level of interventionist judging is good when people say things that are clearly like absurd and that you should be judging according to the standard of what the average reasonable voter is. But I think that there's too many judges who, to quote Alec, if they think that a claim is just like purely crazy, will just automatically discredit it, even if the claim is proven and could exist in the real world. And I feel like a part of this is an overvaluing of stock ideas that you've heard the most. So the more that you've heard a particular argument, the more kind of normal and viable it seems to you, especially for less experienced judges, because you've seen it being credited in the past. And then you're like, whoa, pattern recognition. Whereas I feel like making arguments that exist outside of the meta are penalized more because you're more likely to dismiss as soon as being rogue, and you haven't seen other good speakers win with those arguments. So I think that creativity, even if creative arguments could be plausible, are often automatically like looked down upon. Higher argumentative burdens are applied to arguments that exist outside of the meta to too large of an extent. And in general, judges should be more open minded to crediting a broader diversity of arguments rather than arguments that they've just heard being credited before.
So the spicier question that arises in my mind,
Uh oh, I'm
um,
scared now.
ob- obviously is so I generally agree with
Mm.
what you've outlined as some of the bigger problems in
Mm.
judging trends.
Oh wait, can I
So
wait? Can I add another annoying judging trend? I
sure,
forgot one.
sure, sure.
People who don't know how to give speaker scores. Oh my goodness! Like I feel like people compress like speaker scores that are given out, especially in like good rooms. They'll just like cap it at like 82, and obviously there's like a couple people. There's like a couple like exceptions, but I feel like in general people should like use the range. Okay, and this might be one of my hotter takes, and this might sound a bit rude, but I feel like there's some judges who cap speaks based on what they got when they were a speaker, which is why I think that generally judges who had more successful speaking careers are more willing to give higher speaks. Like, I don't mean this to sound condescending, but even if you did not give an 85, that doesn't mean that other speakers can also get an 85. Like, I feel like people should be more willing to use the range both on the high end and also on the low end as well. Okay, yeah, sorry, no, go ahead for your spicy question.
To what extent, especially I think maybe the second one, which is that judges, well, you've mentioned some of the things our judges are not as attentive and they
Mm,
rely on their overall intuition of what sounded
mm,
strong within the round.
mm.
So would you say that in certain situations this has been good for you and
No,
have been advantageous for you?
no, I don't think so. Like, I feel like people think that like matter dumpers get an advantage with judges because judges hear a bunch of claims, and even though they're not proven, they're just like, yeah, like that person on OG had 5 arguments, so I'm just gonna give them the win. I actually think that it works the opposite. And for judges who do intuition based judging, they're not going to remember every single argument that they ran. And often what they're looking for is that like golden nugget impact or that golden nugget piece of framing that actually rewards strategic speakers substantially more. So I would actually say that the judges who I tend to do better with are judges who are stronger at tracking and are more like meticulous in how they judge. And I struggle more with like the vibes based judges kind of vibes.
Uh, I would disagree with this to a certain
Okay.
extent. Here is my take.
Yeah,
So
go for it.
I would agree with the first part. I think like I almost always you want a meticulous judge that writes down most of the stuff
Mm-hmm.
that are happening within the round. But I do think that there are certain situations where, uh, especially if the judges are less experienced, they would because they maybe struggle with kind of comparing. If you give a lot of points within a round, it's
Mm-hmm.
now you have to, if you have to compare a lot of material, and you
Mm-hmm.
have to think of how a lot of different points interact with each other, but also at the same time think a lot about were they really proven, to what extent they were proven, all of those things. This
Mm-hmm.
takes time, and in a 15-minute discussion it's hard to do. So I do think that there are many situations where it would be advantageous to matter dump, and the problem is not with the matter dumping itself. The problem is that when you have a combination of these, some of the things that you've outlined, not so attentive judging, certain judges going on vibes and things like that. Now when you play into the fact who is speaking, who is in the round, and all of those things, I think sometimes it is easier to just give the call towards the speakers who are having more content putting out, because the general perception within the round is that it's easier for them to kind of um, go on top in terms of what they brought within the round, because they cover a wide range of impacts as opposed to certain teams that only focus on one or two at a given time.
Okay, I'm gonna rebuild my argument. So I agree that, like, in theory, judges in the deliberation room should assess whether each individual argument was proven. But I think how it often manifests, and even like I've been judging more lately, what I've seen is people are just like, no, they had 5 arguments, they were all underproven. That team like proved their claim. So you can just as easily dismiss all arguments that someone made by claiming that they were underproven by virtue of their numeracy. And often how it manifests is like literally like recently I did a round where I tried to run 3 extensions even though it was literally just like one extension that had different subpoints, and a judge was like, oh, ha 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 ha, you tried to run 3 extensions. So I feel like there's also a tendency like matter dumping. While some very good speakers have been matter dumpers, I also feel like a lot of people like to shit on the style, and there's a lot of judges where if you are seen as being a matter dumping speakers, even if you have proven each individual link, they will automatically just presume that each individual link was underproven and then default to teams who ran less content, even if the less content was proven of equal caliber of the person who ran more content.
So I'm gonna insert a question from the audience. You,
Okay.
you probably know this particular audience member, but I'm gonna keep them anonymous.
Is
Uh,
it Mr. Ruman?
no, it is not. That much I can
Ooh,
say. It
is it
is not
Mr.
Roman.
Alec?
I, I'm telling you, it's anonymous. I'm not gonna tell you.
Okay, okay. I'll be able to
But
tell, and then I'll reveal them to the world.
given the bad trends that we've established that exist within debating, who are some of your least liked judges?
I'm gonna start with my least favorite circuit to judge me. Nikki, do you want to guess what my least favorite circuit is?
Surprise me, but I
The
do know the answer.
Bulgarians. If I had to choose one circuit not to judge me, it would definitely be the Bulgarians, especially Rumen. And I don't even have any qualms saying this because I've told this to Rumen. So the reason why I'm not the biggest fan of the Bulgarians judging is because I feel like it is sometimes more vibes based judging, and not even because like I think you guys are all good at tracking, but I think it's more like just buying stuff that you find the most like true or the most persuasive rather than reasons that are given and just like dismissing things based on them being like purely crazy. So yeah, if I had to choose one circuit not to judge me, it would be the Bulgarians. In terms of other people I dislike being judged by, and I'm gonna caveat specific things, so I think that some of them are good judges, but these are not people I think are bad judges. These are people who I don't like being judged by, which is an important differentiation. I feel like I need to give Ilya a shout out after our long and complicated judging history. So for context, Ilya has judged me like so many times. Like even though I always lose with him, for some reason at every single tournament, he's always allocated to judge me. And I famously complain that I always get the third and the 78 with him, which if you look over broad history is true. So I think Ilya is very smart. And the last time he judged me, I was so happy because I got the win and I got an 83. And I was just like, Eureka, I can like die happy. I think the reason that I struggle with Ilya's judging, and I see that this is true of some Balkan judges, in particular Serbs, that there's more of a focus on like I would say there's like more anti matter dumping. So like running one argument and proving it really well and explaining why it's the most important argument is rewarded more than running like many arguments. So maybe that's why I struggle with him. I also think that I've given a lot of bad speeches in front of him, so it's not fully his fault. Next judge who I dislike being judged by is Claudia. So the reason I dislike being judged by Claudia is wait, let me rephrase this. I dislike being judged by Claudia, especially on back half, because I feel like she's an example of a judge who has quite rigorous expectations when it comes to the amount that you're bench weighing. And sometimes like your argument's just like better, or like you run out of time to bench weight, and then you're like, crap, I didn't do enough bench weighing for Claudia, so I'm probably going to drop. So I find like being back half with like Claudia, I'm always like, oh my gosh, I'm probably gonna drop, especially in like at rounds. It's like relatively high risk. And then I also want to give an example of like very, very good judges, even though I prefer being judged by some other very, very good judges. So I think like Tekle is a very, very, very good judge. Like I respect him a lot as a judge and as a speaker. But there's like I would say like very good judges still have differences in the kind of things that they credit. So if I had to choose if I was going to be judged by Tekle, if I was going to be judged by Harish, I would choose Harish because I feel like Tekle kind of values like stylistic packaging a bit more, like how you're presenting arguments, more like narrative type things. And those are things that I really struggle with as an individual speaker. Whereas if I'm going to be judged by like another very good judge, like Tekle, like Harish or Hadar, I feel like they're like they care less about that stuff. Maybe Hadar to a slightly lesser extent, and more about how arguments are built in like a vacuum. So even if I think that judges are like equally as good objectively, there's still some that I would rather be judged by than other people. I
I
hope I don't
feel
get
like
canceled.
I feel like you've single-handedly managed to unite the Serbs and the Bulgarians, which I guess is a
Oh
good
my
thing
gosh!
in this
No, I
particular
love the
sense.
Serbs. I love the Serbs so much.
Okay, let's go line by line, right? Something that I usually don't like to do against you, but maybe this is a
Okay.
good this is a good place to go. Uh, okay, first of all, on the
Mm-hmm.
Bulgarians part, I've judged you only
Yes.
once in my life. You have
No,
no
you
idea
haven't.
how I
You've judged
judged.
me way more than that.
I literally have judged you once in your ever. This like tell me another example of when I
Okay, to be
judged you.
fair, to be fair, Nikki, I think that you're the best Bulgarian judge.
Oh, oh, thank you, thank you. I think I think the Vietnam team will appreciate this comment at least.
If I end up
Uh,
speaking Vietnam, even though I don't plan on it, guys, give me some donations.
um, I would generally. So this is let's have this conversation, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it opens up a bigger conversation, kind of connected already to the Doom threat. So
Mm-hmm.
I disagree with the notion that it is necessarily hard to judge arguments on the basis of certain levels of intuitions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but let me explain it in a better way than just shitting on judges like Roman did in the thread, which has its own appeal, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that there are levels to this, and if we are seen as the circuit that is more um, um, caring about these particular things, such as I don't know, common sense, I don't particularly think this is a necessarily bad thing. Maybe some in some cases this might be more intrusive within the particular round, but the way that I've always have thought about judging is to a certain extent, in order to identify the burdens of the arguments, you need to be some level of interventionist. And the way that you go about this is not, this is bullshit, I don't believe this because blah, 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 but rather, if this were to be true, what were the possible things that should happen? And to what extent are they recognized by the particular speaker? So the path to victory that they have put onto themselves, but also in general, uh, are is there analysis towards why the particular reasons that they give are actually proving the particular argument, which in certain cases is not particularly true. So maybe Rumen, or I don't know, another Bulgarian that has just you feel have intruded too much within the round. But if you think about it, I'm pretty sure that in some of these cases you didn't necessarily um, made it easy for the particular judge to buy absolutely what you're trying to prove. Would you say that this is a fair statement to make?
I think this is definitely a fair statement. I think it's a two-way street of like the judges can be like maybe a little bit too interventionist, but also like have done a better job of selling the argument as well. So I do agree with you there. But like, okay, so
Okay.
in general, wait, do you want to keep
Yeah, go
going?
go ahead. Go ahead.
I
Go
was gonna
ahead.
say, like, I think that a baseline level of interventionism, if you run like absolutely insane things, are fine. But I think that like the debate is not whether judges should be 0% interventionist, which is clearly wrong. But it's like where do you draw the line of where acceptable interventionism is? And I think that it can be quite subjective when it comes to a lot of arguments in terms of if they're actually crazy or not. Like if I was trying to prove to like who's like a lefty. If I was trying to prove to Bizer that communism is good, he'd have a very different burden of the intuition of what I had to prove in that argument than if I tried to prove to Ruman that communism is good. So this is where I think that the complexity comes of, especially given how globally diverse debating is. It's like the burden of what are intuitive and unintuitive claims are vastly different.
This much I agree. It's probably going to be very hard to convince Roman that communism is good.
Hey, he
Um,
wears a Bernie Sanders shirt. We can just pretend that it's not ironic.
yeah, of course. Um, Here is what I will say though, and this is something that I learned fairly early into my international competitive career, and it's something that Ayao kind of taught me, which is essentially the bigger the impact you're going for, the larger the burdens you have to prove go. And I think this is where some of these misconceptions that maybe Bulgarian judges are too interventionist come from, which is that if you're trying to prove large scale big impacts, which sometimes teams go overboard with, it I think it's fair and sometimes necessary to impose higher burden on these types of arguments, because it essentially means that you have to do more work to win the round. Why do I think so? Because usually these higher impact arguments are very easy to weigh against other types of arguments within the round. If you prove world peace, usually you win. So the question is, did you actually prove world peace, or to what extent did you prove world peace in the particular round? So this is where I think the particular line should be drawn, is exactly at this particular level. And I think usually when we the Bulgarians or whatever complain about this stuff, it is because uh, it's not necessarily the cases where you have actually stood up and gave five structural reasons for world peace or something like that, but otherwise the cases where somebody would say and give two sentences that sounds very very good, but in fact don't necessarily prove the large impact they're going for. And this trend is sometimes prevalent in speakers that would like to run many ideas within one speech. So it's rather like not necessarily no, but you point to yourself. But I mean, it's usually speakers who are trying to be like you, right? Usually speakers who are are implementing the same strategy without necessarily doing the work for it. You know what I mean? This is why I generally agree that it is a good strategy if you do it right, but many people don't. But sometimes they get away with it, especially within different circuits where the burden of proof and how we do these particular things is much less prevalent. So I think these are the cases where what we're talking about is problematic. But I don't want to. Um,
Wait, I need to respond to this.
uh, no, sure, but I don't want to spend too much time on figuring this particular line. But I'm happy to hear your response, of
Yeah,
course.
I mean, I feel like you're very passionate about defending the Bulgarians' respect. So where I disagree is that I do obviously for going for a larger impact, there's a trade-off between there's a higher burden to prove that impact. I think that the phrasing of this should be like there is a higher burden, not that we should impose a higher burden. Because like there is a higher burden, right? Like as the average reasonable voter, you know that. But I feel like sometimes like the thought process is too much. Like oh, like this is crazy. Like you're never going to reach that burden. And there's kind of like an increased doubting of the argument before the argument has even began. And my second critique is that I agree in theory if the only time that interventionism is being used is to like penalize arguments that have a higher burden and that burden is a net, that's obviously 100% fine. Like that's how you should judge. I just think that in a world where you allow interventionism, that's not the only way that it manifests, and that there's some arguments that might not actually be a high burden, but because you're Rumen and you don't think that you can prove that communism is good, you'll just think that the burden is too high. So I still think that there's a problem of like ideally how will we implement interventionism and how interventionism will manifest in a world where it's like allowed.
One last comment on this.
Okay, fine. You can have the last word about the Bulgarians.
No, just in terms of Roman, I think he's more talk, less action on these types of issues. I think if we got him into the podcast, for example, right now, he would actually give a much more nuanced opinion on these things, but he does like to be controversial in these particular aspects. So I would actually think that if we really get down to it, as we are doing right now, we would obviously agree that there are levels to this, and that's if you cross apply this particular phenomenon, there are definitely bad examples of interventionist judging. So it's really about the nuance and the situations that we're talking about, which I don't think necessarily disproves what you said, but rather just giving it more context and uh, thought. What one thing I will say is that as a host of this podcast, what I'm most passionate, even more than Bulgarians, is good content, which certainly you're providing right now.
I'm
So
so glad. I was worried I was gonna be boring, but I think I've been funny.
for sure, for
I don't
sure.
know if I've been funny. I've been spicy. That's even better than funny.
So while we are riding this wave of um, talking shit about debating, what were some of your biggest robberies?
Ooh. Hmm. I also need to do the thing where I think about it and I write it down. I don't know. Oh, I remember one of them. Um, in my first year, I was doing Cambridge IB with Ruth, and we were in the semifinals, and we lost on a 3-2 split. And Matt and Olya split for us, and Bobby and two other people I can't remember. I think one of them might have been Tim Keen. I don't remember the other two people split against us, and it was like the space race debate. And I was very certain that we should have gone through that round because I thought that one of the teams who went through was entirely derivative of their top half team. And I was kind of upset about that because like at that point in my debate career, making like the Cambridge final would have been like a big deal for me. Let me think about other big robberies. I think that Kat and I should have won the Imperial Ivy final.
Okay, but you didn't mention any of the big rounds. So
Yeah, I'm
you're
trying to
happy
think of.
with
Well, the thing is, like, I feel like a lot of the big rounds I've dropped have been like fair. Like, um, like I think us getting kicked out of Korea semis. I know some people think that we were robbed. It was very close. I think between us and Zagreb, I think it was fair. I think that we definitely shouldn't have gone through the whatchamacallit, uh the Belgrade quarters. I feel like the Madrid quarters. I don't know. I think I was like, if I were judging the Madrid quarters, I think that we should have gone through. But I think that my speech was so bad and so unstrategic that it was close enough that I would even consider it to be like a massive, massive robbery. Um.
throughout your whole career, which were some of the speakers that you least enjoyed debating
Oh my
against?
gosh. Oh, debating against. I thought you were going to say debating with. Who did I least enjoy debating against? Hmm. I don't know. Okay, I feel like I don't mean this to put myself on a pedestal, but I feel like I have like a lot of respect for most of my opponents, like the people who I like regularly like lose to. Like I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, like modern debating went to shit, but I honestly just think that most of my competitors are quite good. There's no one who really like annoyed me, who I dislike speaking against. Who did I dislike speaking against anyone? I don't know. No, I was gonna say maybe Rumen, but I honestly feel like I've given Rumen too much shit in this podcast. I need to diversify the number of people who I'm complaining about. But like, hmm, I feel like Rumen's a pretty good scammer. You're also a pretty
Really?
good scammer. You're also a pretty good. No, but being a scammer is like a compliment. Like now I'm being nice. If I just like speaking against you, it's like you sometimes have like when you do your like intuition prompts to like the audience, and you're like, so I have a question for the audience. How can you beat that? Like I could give you three reasons, but like I'm not gonna win the hearts and minds of the people, you know. Um, that's one of them. I feel like I lost to Ateneo a lot. That was annoying.
So what is particular about debating against Ateneo or Rumen that you dislike?
No, I mean I don't actually dislike debating against like you and Rumen as a collective. It's just like you appeal to the kind of judges who care more about like emotion and stuff, and I can't really compete with you on that level. So like it's just like risky, right? Because you have to get a judge who's more rhetorically oriented, or who cares about like running less more. Like think about how many times Ilya gave you the win when we hit you, about compared to the number of times that Ilya gave me the win when we hit you. Like I just feel like other speakers who do things that are more similar to me. Like if you consider a speaker like Matt Cato, for example, I feel like it's more predictable because I feel like we're kind of trying to win the same judges, right? Because we're both matter dumping speakers. So it's kind of more safe. Of like if I'm better than him in that particular round, I can probably beat him. Whereas if you take speakers who debate more differently from me, then there's more of a risk that if there's a judge who just prefers that style of debating, I'll be on a lag behind, even if I individually give a good performance that round. Who else did I
Yeah, that's
dislike?
that's fair. I think that's a good overall explanation of.
Yeah.
I think this is something that we all struggle with. Like if you have debaters with different style. So
Mm-hmm.
let's touch upon this particular topic of style. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, my personal opinion within the current meta is
Mm-hmm.
that there's almost this reverse problem with style where just because you're presenting an argument in a non-traditional way, and at this point it has become non-traditional to
Mm-hmm.
to to present arguments more of a rhetorical way of style, etc. Then the question is, to what extent, because in my opinion it has become a problem towards judges dismissing your analysis because you've provided it in a different way, be it as a joke or as something that's not traditionally viewed as the norm, such as like providing five structural reasons, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that? And do you think that this is a general problem or it's for the better?
Um, Nuance would be my overall answer of like I think that style, like I'm not like an anti-style person. Like I do think that style is like valuable, but I don't think it's like a replacement for analysis. Like I think that if it's sufficiently made to be a form of analysis, that's fine. Like if you explain or if you emote an impact because you use a lot of rhetoric to explain the importance of the impact, I think it's like fine to weigh that impact as mattering more than you otherwise would without style because it was like more persuasive. But I also don't think that if you just ask 5 questions to the audience and you just do intuition pump, that means that you have a principle if you don't also provide underlying reasons why the principle exists. Cough, cough, champagne IV finals. So I know that you're salty at me for that. So like the short answer is like I don't think it's dismissed under the status quo. I don't think it should be dismissed, but I also think it needs to be evaluated in like a reasonable way where I think it can like enhance other ideas that you're making and can be a useful supplement. But I don't think that just having rhetoric is a replacement for arguments.
So, what are intuition puns according to you? Because in my perspective, intuition pumps usually are analysis to the extent in which, especially if we talk about uh, proving principled arguments that usually are more in regards to what people have a general feeling of to be fair or not fair and things like that, which are not necessarily quantifiable within the human experience.
Oh, I think that wait, to clarify, I think that intuition pumps are analysis. I just don't think that they're often like complete analysis. Like to me, the most powerful intuition pumps are like you provide an analytical foundation for a principle, and then you're like, I have a couple intuition pumps to strengthen this, and then those intuition pumps strengthen what your underlying analysis is. Like I don't think it's impossible to win a principle by just using intuition pumps, but I think it's a lot more flimsy, especially because intuition pumps are rarely universally agreed upon, and like because given the fact that people have like different intuitions that exist, I think they can also be taken out with like reasons why something ought exist and just how we ought think about something.
Okay, but if you provide an intuition pump that is connected to, let's say, and this is why we let people take drugs even if it's not necessarily good for them, or eat bad food or things like that, which is
Yeah.
essentially an intuition pump. Wouldn't you agree that in certain cases this is quite enough to kind of prove that something, if you make the right connection to the principle you're defending, it is very useful to establish that the principle that you are um, proving is something that exists and it's something that
Well, yes, like
people.
I think that intuition pumps are very useful in analytical addition. Like if I'm judging you, give intuition pumps. But the crucial thing that you said there is it's a way to connect it to the underlying analysis. Like, okay, let's take your example. I'm gonna wait. Can I pick on you? It'll be funny.
For sure.
Okay, so I'll take your. I think you use this as an example in the Champagne IV finals, where you were making the principle about like the importance of like choice and agency. So one of the intuition pumps that you gave was like I think you said this, or if not, like I've used this in debates before of like if your partner is cheating on you, you would want to know about that, even if it would make you less happy, because that expands your choice, right? But like a lot of people would like disagree with that, and they would perhaps think that like they wouldn't want to know. Like I've had arguments with like my friends about this, they wouldn't want to know. So I think that something like that doesn't necessarily universally apply. Whereas if you provide like an underlying reason for a principle, it can be more universal. Or even just like using the example that you gave about like an intuition pump of why we should let people take drugs even if they're bad for them. Let's say that you're using the intuition pump of like states let people do a lot of dangerous things under the status quo. Like we let people skydive and play contact sports and stuff. I mean, some people don't think that we should allow people to do that, or like an op team could respond to that by being like, there's like degrees of danger that exist, or the likelihood that you will OD from drugs is like higher than the likelihood that you will be killed in a contact sport. So I think it's stronger if you like start your principle with like, here's why in general we think that states should be more libertarian, or we think that agency is a really important value, and then you're like intuition pump, here's other cases where we also recognize that principle. I think that that is a lot less vulnerable to response when you give the underlying reason of like for like whatever principle, like oh like the good life is very like subjective, the state is an evil coercive mechanism, state power principle, tin shit, blah blah blah. And then you like I think that makes it a more robust claim than if other people respond like a more like less vulnerable to responses from other teams.
Allow me to disagree, and it
Of
will take us
course.
back to the previous conversation.
Yes.
So you're absolutely right that intuition pumps can never be true for everybody. But
Yes.
isn't this the same problem of like where you're becoming too interventionist as a judge? Because obviously, like all of these intuition pumps that you can give, for example, let's say conscription, when states do conscription, or even
Mm-hmm.
intuition pumps about Nazis being bad and things like that. Surely there are some people out there who disagree with these things, but they are still true for many others. So, at which point are you too interventionist if you are not considering this because of the reason that some people might disagree with the statement in general?
Okay, I first have a meme answer and then I have a real answer. The meme answer is that when you ask the audience how they feel about something, the judges should just look at the number of people who are raising their hand at the audience to see if they agree with Niki. And if the majority of people agree with Niki's intuition pump, it would then be interventionist to give the win to the other team. That's my meme answer. The real answer is just like, is it true that most people actually agree with a thing? Like, I feel like intuition pumps exist diversely in terms of like the level of controversy and agreement around them. If it's like a really like if it's like an intuition pump that's a very like obvious intuition of like people don't like to get sick or something like that, I don't know. That should obviously hold more in a local way than issues that are like genuinely controversial. And like even an intuition pump that's only true for some people still has analytical weight. But I don't think it meets the bar of persuasiveness to the same extent as like if you prove an intuition pump is true from the vast majority of people. Well, I just want to like clarify my stance of like intuition pumps are good. I just think that they're rarely with zero other structural analysis past structural for structural business podcast with like barely any other structural analysis are like enough to be an argument inherently. Like sometimes they can. It also depends on the strength of other teams' arguments. It depends on the persuasiveness of the intuition pump. It depends on the context of the round that's existing. I'm just saying that on a balance of probabilities, with literally nothing else, they're usually not enough. They are just a very useful complement to other analysis.
I agree, but I still don't think that you can necessarily make that distinction in a particular case, especially when we're talking about people's feelings and how they perceive certain types of arguments, which is kind of like my biggest problem that I have with this. It's I'm not salty that you particularly don't buy one of the intuition pumps that they make in a particular round.
Mm-hmm.
My general problem with this is that when you make the intuition pumps and when you do these types of argument, which is just explain this in that particular sense rather than giving three reasons, blah blah blah, for why this is true. Like for example, people giving five reasons as to why people want to be happy or whatever bullshit like that. Um, I think these are the cases where judges and I would say this like not even gonna use the champagne every final, but rather just judges in general. There is a trajectory that I'm seeing towards being more dismissive in general, just because of the argument being presented in that way. Meaning, they would not really think about what are the possible implication toward of the arguments or of the intuition pump if that intuition pump is true. Even if you disagree with the intuition pump, to what extent does that kind of tip the scale? I think there are a lot of judges, especially ones that have entered debating more recently, who would disregard this or not really even think about how it can be impacting the round, but just outright say you haven't actually provided analysis for this, which is not necessarily a comment that I have about that final, but I'm other asking whether you would agree that this might be a problem in general in our.
Yes, I agree that judges should not automatically dismiss ideas or persuasive techniques because they are presented in different platforms. There you go.
Very PC, very
You can die
PC.
happy.
Very, very PC. Sure, sure. Let's let's move on to the interesting conversation, Naomi.
I feel like there's
Um,
been multiple interesting conversations. You always segue with that.
of course, of course. But I'm building hype. It gets
Okay,
better
okay.
with
We
every
need to
minute that
increase
you're
the viewers.
listening.
Everyone subscribe to Structural Reasons.
Yes, yes, please, please do. Um, so the gold conversation. And before we start the gold conversation, I know a bunch of you out there who only click
Uh-oh.
on the GOAT conversation and don't listen to the podcasts, which is fine. You're absolutely welcome to stay for the ride, but please click the subscribe button. It helps us a lot. It makes the channel what it is. So please let's get there because I know that more than 50% of you are not subscribed and you're still watching this video. So the goat conversation,
No, I'm
who is the
curious.
goat? Who is the goat? Who is the
Okay,
goat,
this is
Naomi?
like you literally ask them to everyone. This is not like the golden moment. Okay, I have a hot take about the goat question, which is I feel like everyone's lying about the goat because I literally have only seen like a tiny fraction of debate history debate. And like I know this will seem like the cop out answer. I'll try and give you more of like a real one um later. But like I'm not as much of a nerd as like all these massive nerds. Like Tejas and Alex, sure, they spend hours like sifting through like old YouTube videos because like debate is their life, and then they watch like every single like old speaker debate, and then they're like can actually maybe have an informed opinion, even though they didn't record videos before like 2000. But I know everyone has an informed opinion of this. Like I've literally like I only really see the people who debate who are on the circuit. Like I've only probably seen like one or two videos of like Sheng Wu and like Dan Hawks. I don't even know how to find these all. So like the real answer is like how on earth am I supposed to know who the GOAT is when I only know like a 20th of debate history? So how I'll answer this question is I'll tell you my favorite speakers who are currently on the circuit, and then because like my GOAT and like my generation, and then I'll say you from the limited exposure I've had who I think is like the best historically. So in terms of speakers I currently think are the best, I think that the best active speaker is Hadar. Like I think that Hadar is top speaker of um what was the last one of Madrid was like very deserved, and I think like overall holistically, I probably respect her the most as a speaker. Other speakers who I think are very good and who I respect a lot, I think that Matt Cato is excellent. I think that Tamar is excellent. I think that Tejas is excellent. Um, of the current speakers, I would say that's probably the group of people who I think are the strongest people or who I'm the most scared of hitting. I also really liked Ignacio back in the day, but I haven't gotten to hit him as much recently. And fine, I'll give Tim credit where credit is deserved. He's also very good. Who else do I think is very good? Yeah, I would say that's like my list of like current speakers who I'm like probably the most like fearful of hitting. Um, and then in terms of people like historically, like this is where I feel like I'm bullshitting a bit because I haven't seen that these people debate that much. But and like I don't want to just repeat other people's answers because I was told like oh all these people are so great. But like of people who I think are probably the best, from what I've seen of Dan Lahab, I think that his speeches are excellent. Like I've seen a couple of his online speeches from the Rand Robin, and I think he was really good. And then I also think that Harish is very good, not just because we're friends, but also because I've debated with him a couple of times, and I really like respect like the thing that I really admire about Harish's debating is how he can take like complex ideas and make them seem more simple and like a conversationalist tone. And then I've also watched a couple of videos of Elle Jones, and I think that she's really good as well. But like, I feel like I can't actually have a proper informed of all these historical people because like, how can I really tell if like Dan Lahab or Shungu was better? And I've both seen them give like two speeches online on YouTube, so I feel like my answers are a bit disingenuous. So these are my more like vibes judging answers.
You have good vibes. Vibes could be better. You definitely missed some important names, but give me one
Wow,
name.
I wonder who you could possibly be thinking of there.
You will be surprised, but give me one name. Give me one name. If you had to pick,
Give you one name of what? The goat?
yes.
I can't do that. I don't know. I've like barely seen any of these people speak.
This is
It would
absolutely
like
cut.
it would be a lot like that would just be clickbait. It would just be a lie. So you can be like Naomi thinks X person is a goat. When the real answer is Naomi does not know who the goat is.
Who could potentially be the goat?
I don't I told you all the people who could potentially be the goat. You can use something else in my video to be like clickbaity of like which judges does Naomi dislike. You don't need to be like the goat question is like gonna be the clickbaity thing for my podcast.
Okay, I'll reiterate the question with something
Mm-hmm.
more interesting. Where
Mm-hmm.
do you fit in the gold conversations according to you? Because you have been mentioned in the gold conversations.
Have I? I didn't know anyone mentioned me in the goat conversations.
No, you have been mentioned.
I don't think I'm one of the goats.
Could you potentially
I
be?
don't know. I
Once
mean,
you retire, do you think you have
well,
a
I play.
certain
Well,
claim?
okay. The thing is, like, maybe if I debated for like 5 more years, I could get good enough. But I don't plan on debating for that long. I know everyone's like, oh, like retirement, but like this EUDC, if I end up speaking, might be like my last major. I don't intend on speaking on Vietnam, so I don't think I'll stay in the activity long enough to refine my skill set. And as it stands, I definitely don't think I'm near the GOAT conversation. Um, I would need to become like I think I'm a bit too like boring and standard of a speaker. Like I like martyrdom, but like I don't know. Like there's some speakers like I'll be nice to Bulgarians now, like you and Rumen and like Alec and like I feel like I'm like engaging to listen to. Where I feel like I'm just a bit like blah. So that's like one issue. Like I don't think I'm stylistically interesting, and then I also think I have a long way to go in terms of refining my strategic abilities for me to be anywhere close to that level. So as it currently stands, no, I don't think I'm near the goats.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you for the cop out answer. Let's move
That's not
on
the cop
to
out answer. That's
different
the
topics.
honest answer. Literally, you said, "Do you think that you're one of the goats?" I was like, "No." How's that the cop out answer?
Okay, let's move on with something interesting.
Okay.
You mentioned the upcoming EUDC, which
Mm-hmm.
might be your last major,
Famous last words.
although I'm not so convinced, but let's say it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, who do you think are the teams that you're watching out for? Some of your potential rivals for getting
Hmm.
the European title.
I think as it stands, I would currently say that I'm probably the most scared of debating Bizzer and Maria. Based on like when I hit them at Vienna last, I would say they were probably the strongest team to me in the field that's currently competing. And I also know that they're quite dedicated and they do a lot of drills. So they probably have a lot of improvement potential before UDC as well. Um, I also think that Alec and Belly are very good as well. So although I've not been the nicest to the Bulgarians, I think that you guys are all great debaters and that one of you has a good chance of winning EUDC. I also think that the
Great
Oxford
debaters, just not great judges, right?
Yes, no, literally. This is what I think. Okay. And then sometimes it do feel like that. And then in terms of other good rosters, I think that the Oxford delegation this year is quite strong. I think that I think that Mark and Andrew are very good. I think that Gabby and Samuel are very good. The teams might give the win over you in the Champagne IB final that you're salty about. And and Elena and Aiden and Annika and Serena are also definitely strong teams as well. So like I think that Oxford is the most like consistently like strong delegation through like all of their teams and like they can like I think that they're all like likely to break and can give other teams a run for their money. Who else is even doing it this year? I don't know. I think that Ted's really good. Whoever Ted is speaking with. Is Ted speaking with Kira? If Ted's speaking with Kira, they would be a very, very good team. They're both good. Yeah,
Don't
like
know.
if that's a team will be scary. And then I feel like there's like some up and coming like Israeli teams who are quite good. Like Naomi and Yusha and Annie and Boaz are solid. But yeah, like my like non cop out answers, I'm probably the most scared of Bizzer and Marie at the moment. Of if I end up speaking Euros.
So you haven't decided on speaking Euros, or have you decided?
I'm leaning towards speaking with this. Okay, by the time the podcast is out, I feel like this will be as risky to say, but like I will most likely be speaking at Euros. Yes.
So how do you go about preparing this time? Learning all
Mm,
the lessons of before. What are
yeah.
your top three things that you're doing to prep for
I mean,
Euros?
I feel like a lot of these things have been already like hinted at throughout the podcast. But like number one, I would refine my team dynamic. I would work on my mental game more, and then I would probably do more like drills myself to work on my strategy more.
So in terms
Oh yeah,
of
one thing is I would also like case file better. Like I don't really case file that much, but I read a lot. But I feel like I try and just like I like read a lot, but I'm never good at like guessing the topics of specific tournaments. Like a lot of people at Madrid Worlds correctly predicted like the Latin America like currency motion. Like I know that like Hadar correctly predicted it and then told people and then those people also correctly predicted it and I was like literally reading about like the history of like Franco and like Spain's like film industry. So I think I'm gonna do a little bit more to like be strategic in terms of how I prep. Like, yeah, Milos is on Black Sea. I'll be like, I better learn how this like e-gaming nonsense works.
I see.
And
Um,
Bulgarian politics.
Bulgarian politics are definitely very interesting. So what's the goal for this Euros?
Um, I actually think that this is I'm not 100% decided yet because I would need to kind of assess like I haven't really spoken with like I don't want to give too much away about who I'm likely speaking with yet because it's not 100% confirmed. But like I haven't really debated that much with like my likely future partner. So I want to set like realistic goals based on our team dynamic and how well we work together. But obviously no, I want to you know what that's bullcrap. I want to win Euros. This is nonsense. I want to win and top speak and top break. No, actually, I don't really care that much about top breaking and top speaking. I just want to win because like I feel like I've won. Like there's like majors and then there's like majors. Like I won like Cambridge and EWS round robin, but they're not in the same basket as UDC and WDCR. So I want to win one of the real majors. And like I could like lie and say my goal is semis, but realistically, I'm probably going to be in it to win it. Or I'd probably be like content if I made finals, but secretly I'd secretly still want to win.
No, I think that's a good goal to have, especially if you're burning your bridges for next competitions. That's fair enough. Um,
I need to go. If I'm actually going to retire after years, I need to go out with a bang. You know.
yeah, definitely, definitely. What are some of your debating highlights throughout your career that you look back to the most?
Okay, well, I'm obviously just gonna use this as an excuse to tell the lemon bear story because I literally the only thing I wanted to talk about when I came on the podcast was the lemon bear story, and you were supposed to have it in your back during the podcast, but instead your dog is eating it. Who might lemon bear be? The audience is wondering. Ooh, okay, so lemon bear is a gift that I gave Niki after staying in his apartment for a bit, and the origin of lemon bear is very funny. So Niki and I, the first tournament that we did together was the KCL Open, and it was such a volatile tournament. Like we were judged by like boomers the entire in rounds and we're doing like horribly. And then I honestly I don't really care. I don't think anyone like are gonna like watch the podcast and they are boomers, so it's fine. And then we got to the finals and then we won the finals. But like before Nikki's like the finals was like this fun motion about like there was some like afterlife type thing. I don't even remember. But then before Nikki's speech, so we all got Yaka at the tournament, and the Yaka obviously had lemons in it. I'm just gonna presume that the audience knows about Yaka because like everyone knows about Yaka. So the Yaka had lemons in it, and then before Nikki's speech, I'm gonna like demonstrate. Let's say this is the Yaka, and then this is the lemon. He like he's like already quite tipsy at this point because he's been drinking his like Yaka, and then he's like, guys, and now I'm going to eat the lemon. And then I just like ate the lemon like whole, and then everyone burst out laughing. So now like the lemon became like the meme because Niki like ate the lemon like before his speech. And then at the social that night before Niki left, I also like ate a lime in front of like ate a full lime in front of everyone in his honor. So lemon became like it became like an in joke, you know. So then um I was staying at Nikki's apartment after Sophia opened, which was really fun. And I was like, I need to buy Nikki like a housewarming gift because that's like the polite Balkan thing to do. And you all know I'm like honorary Balkan in like 3 different countries by now. So then I was like, I'm gonna buy Nikki a housewarming gift, and it's gonna be more creative than just buying like rakia or some shit that like tastes like shit and disappears in 1 second, anyways. So I was like, I'm gonna order him a gift on Amazon. But I was like, I don't want it to be a boring gift because gifts are nicer when they're like personal. So I was like, I need to commemorate our lemon moment in our tournament win. So I got him a stuffed cow that had a lemon on it, and it's like really like fluffy and like squishable and adorable. And usually, if you look at the previous YouTube editions of Nikki's podcast, he has Lemon Bear in the background of the podcast. But now his dog, who's very very cute, has taken Lemon Bear as his own. Um, which is I have mixed feelings about because on the one hand, I love dogs and they deserve to have cute toys and cute presents as well. But on the other hand, it's Nikki's toy. So I feel like this is why the lemon bear is not in the video because it's currently with Nikki's dog. Uh yeah, so that's I don't know if that's my favorite memory, but that's what I wanted to say in response to your question. Now let me try and answer the question, think of if I have other favorite memories. Hmm.
Just while you're thinking, I have an addition to this story. So
Okay.
it really is a story about toxic masculinity at the end. I have to be truthful here because what happened at that tournament is that we had a Yaka briefing, and for people who don't know what Yaka is, it is essentially uh, a lot of vodka mixed with lemons, and the end result is it tastes like lemonade, but it's pure vodka. So it's very high alcoholic.
I like hate alcohol and the shit is so good. Okay, that's my slight tangent. Continue.
Absolutely, it's very tasty. So in the Yaka briefing, what they said is, be mindful that this is very alcoholic, so don't drink too much, and also under any circumstances, do not eat the lemon. because the lemon is especially highly alcoholic because it has absorbed the alcohol. So this is the first important caveat to this story. The second important caveat is that we were debating LCA. For people who know me, I have a special place in my heart for that particular LCA, which is Matan Ahmed. So Ahmed, being DPM, after his speech, he gets the lemon and he eats it, and the crowd likes it. So then, me, the pretty drunk me in that particular final, is like, oh, but he ate the lemon after his speech. That's not good enough. And so I proceeded to eat the lemon before I give the speech to prove to Ahmed that I am the bigger man, the more toxic masculine man than him, who actually dared to eat the lemon before his speech. And this is why this story became even funnier from my perspective. But yeah, these are
I
the two
actually didn't know
caveats.
this nuance. This is a good thing to add. I didn't know it was part of your competition with Ahmed. But now it's even a bigger flex because you beat Ahmed twice at this tournament. Actually, three times. You beat him in semis, and then you beat him in finals in one of the most important contests, the lemon contest.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, did you think of any different
Well, I
stories?
feel like any other story he's gonna tell is not gonna be as like charismatic and as funny as this story. So I feel like we should just leave it with like the lemon.
Okay. Um, I think that's a good way to then
I
wrap it
agree.
up. Um,
I should go and
and
get a lemon from like the fridge for dramatic effect, but I don't think I have any.
it's okay. We're gonna edit out some lemons in the conversation.
Okay.
Naomi, thank you very much. You are our honorary Balkan, even though you've proceeded to shit on most of the Balkans in
No,
this
I didn't.
podcast.
I gave you very mixed reviews. I gave you very mixed reviews. I literally said that the Bulgarians are the teams I'm most scared of for Euros. You're all good speakers, just some of you are bad judges. And I said that some of you are. I listed. Did I list any of you as the goats? Well, whatever. No, I didn't. cut
I think
that part out.
I,
Cut
I
that part
think
out.
I think that's fair though. I don't think that any of us should be at the goat conversation right now, at least.
Not yet, but who knows what the future holds.
For sure, for sure. That's why you shouldn't sell yourself short as well. Thank you very much for joining. It's been very, very fun. And everyone who is still listening, please, for the love of God, subscribe.
Don't say
Subscribe.
still listening. That sounds so defensive. For the four viewers who are listening, because this is a very fun and engaging podcast, you should now subscribe, like, and subscribe.
Naomi put it the best as the
I
EPL
did.
speaker between the two
I
of
did.
us.
I was derivative.
So long, everyone.
So long.